Tonight is a very important part of our series, Call to Action. Tonight's program is the Gay Rights Movement in Dallas. It's our third program, and we are so pleased to be offering these free public programs to the Dallas community. This is a new venture for the Sixth Floor Museum, and we hope to continue on a monthly basis carrying on such programs to engage the community in various topics that relate to the Kennedy presidency and his legacy. Call to Action has given us, the museum, an opportunity to partner with outstanding organizations such as KERA, and they have produced this wonderful documentary, Finding Our Voice, which you can see here on show right now. We're showing it through the month of July, and we're also selling it downstairs in the museum shop. So we're going to be streaming this film each day through the rest of this month. And I also want to recognize the executive producer, Rick Thompson. I understand he's here tonight. I haven't yet had a chance to meet you. Thank you so much for coming. I also want to say briefly that we have a very important oral history project initiative that has been going on for many years. And I want to recognize Stephen Fagan here because he's right behind with the video recorder and he's waving. But many of you may have stories to tell, and we'd like to encourage you to touch base with him at the end of the evening. And should you have something to share with us, we'd love to capture what you have and archive it, and we hope that we can perhaps incorporate it into new programs in the future. And tonight, I would like to introduce our moderator, Louise Young. She has assembled a diverse panel of individuals who are going to share their stories of inspiration and activism. I'd like to say that as a 13-year-old in 1960, Louise Young had just taken part in her first presidential campaign, carrying Kennedy literature door-to-door in her Oklahoma hometown. Today, she is Dr. Young, a senior software engineer at Raytheon in Plano, Texas. Excuse me while I shuffle my paper. She is also the founder of Raytheon Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender, and Allies Employee Resource Group. She has been a lesbian activist for more than 30 years, receiving numerous awards and honors. She is former co-chair of the Human Rights Campaign Business Council, and she has also presented workshops on GLBT workplace issues in many settings. She and a partner of 35 years, Vivian Armstrong, live in Dallas. And now I would like to introduce and welcome Louise Young, who's now going to introduce our fellow panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nicola, and thanks to the Sixth Floor for arranging this wonderful panel where we are going to share our stories of inspiration from John F. Kennedy and how that has influenced us as GLBT activists. I'm going to introduce my other esteemed panel members. On my far left and your right, Monica Greene. Now, at the time of Kennedy's inauguration, Monica Greene was fascinated by the young American president. She was living in Mexico. She saw him as a leader that spoke about renewal and change. Monica is a famed restaurateur in Dallas. She was born in Mexico City and arrived in Dallas in 1974 and has been involved in the restaurant business for 29 years. She's the general partner and owner and president of Monica Aquí y Allá restaurant and Ciudad DF Mexico City Dining. I know that many of you have enjoyed not only the wonderful food, but Monica and her wonderful staff's hospitality. Her other related restaurant experience includes being an annual judge for the Dallas Morning News National Wine Competition, and she has cooked in the Rising Star Chef Competition. She's featured regularly and gives cooking demonstration at Dallas's Farmers Market, the State Fair of Texas, and local television stations. She recently participated as one of 6 high-profile chefs in a chef cuisine sponsored by D Magazine. She was named Best Restaurateur by 150 of her peers, that is Dallas restaurant owners and chefs, both in 2002 and 2004. Monica's other commitments to the Metroplex area have been well documented. She has served on the board of many local and one national organization, including DIFA, GLAD, and the Foundation for Human Understanding, has helped raise thousands of dollars for charity events, including those in our GLBT community. I would also like to recognize Ron Jefferson to my immediate left and in the center of the group. When Kennedy was inaugurated, Ron Jefferson was 9 years old. He was very struck by his family being happy and excited and looking forward to change in the racial climate of America with John F. Kennedy's inauguration. It made a big impact on young Ron. Now, Ron is very well known in our community. He has been a co-chair and a convention delegate to Men of All Colors Together. He's been a participant and a leader in that organization for many, many years. Also, he has served on the board of the Resource Center of Dallas, a member of the AIDS Advisory Board and the Minority AIDS Advisory Board. He's a founding member of the Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Coalition of Dallas and a founding member of the United Fellowship Church of North Texas. He's also active in the National Association of Black and White Men Together in various leadership positions. He is also active in the Human Rights Campaign and has shown extraordinary leadership skills in that organization, particularly the Black Tie Dinner Committee, and I know many folks have seen Ron and his hard work, the fruits of his labor for Black Tie Dinner. Finally, he has appeared numerous times in local media, including the Dallas Morning News and the Dallas Voice. So we are delighted to have both panelists. Now, one of our panelists, unfortunately, could not be here, Don Mason, the head of AIDS Arms Network, but I'm going to, AIDS Services of Dallas. And Don's, of course, expertise is politics, and so I'm going to try to offer a little bit of that focus to round out the panel. I have several set questions, and I think you will quickly see the relationship of the legacy of JFK to our own GLBT rights movement, not only in Dallas, but in the nation as a whole. I think the influence is very personal for all of us. It's very personal, and it is part of our own legacy of being activists and what made us think that we could make a difference. Now, I noticed folks before the panel started tonight wandering around looking at a lot of the memorabilia for JFK, and I did so too. I love the quote that's back on the wall regarding a call to action, and one of the quotes is from John F. Kennedy, given in November of 1960, that said, "We in the 60s are going to move the world again in the direction of freedom. I ask your help in doing so." And those words, and certainly his message in his inaugural address, laid the foundation for many of us who are the first wave activists in the GLBT movement. Those of us who are the first wave activists are now kind of politely called the Stonewall generation. And that is those who were of age and not necessarily participated in what's called the Stonewall Uprising in New York City in June of 1969, an event that marks the birth of the GLBT rights movement. But those of us who are of that age and who were influenced by JFK, as I said, are now fondly known as the Stonewall generation. I know that personally it's a badge that I wear with honor, and I'd like to kind of segue from the Stonewall generation into my first question I'm going to pose to the panelists, and this is regarding Kennedy's inaugural address, perhaps his most oft-quoted speech and considered one of the great speeches in American history, probably second only to the Gettysburg Address from President Abraham Lincoln. Kennedy's inaugural address was delivered on January 20th, 1961. And I know I remember as a young person taking off school that day, but because my parents, we were living in a small town in Oklahoma, we were very much Kennedy fans. And my parents wanted to let me watch the inauguration. I was 13 years old. And the whole day struck me. A young and vigorous president taking the oath of office on a very, very cold and snowy day in Washington, D.C. But it was his speech that riveted us. And I've asked our panelists to, if you would, tell us your favorite quote from Kennedy's inaugural speech. And maybe those of you in the audience can think of some of perhaps your favorite quote from the inaugural address, and how that influenced you as a young person, and how you believe that that influenced you as you move forward into adulthood. What stuck with you? Monica.
Thank you for a lot. Appreciate. Kennedy symbolized a lot of things to Americans, a lot of things to Americans, but for us Mexicans, what he brought to us was hope. The speech, this famous inaugural speech, very eloquent, was full of good words, iconic messages. But the one thing that I took from him was not what a lot of people tend to remember the most. He talks about the opportunity of freedom. He talks about symbolizing the end and also the beginning of new things, and also what signifies the renewal of things and the birth of new ideas. He focuses on a lot of the political arena of problems we had at that time with the missile crisis and so on. But for us was just that, the ability to be included. Can you hear me? The ability to be included for once and for all, to be a participant in the world. He actually mentions the word sisters and brothers from the South States. Can you hear me? Okay. So anyway, to us, he was talking to us directly, and he symbolized a lot of things in addition to that. He was the first Catholic president, and for us Mexicans, that was a huge thing. And but from the inaugural address, cool. All right. That was very distracting. I could hear myself talking. I apologize. What I wanted to say was that what he talks was about the celebration of freedom. And what symbolized to him his new beginning was also the new beginning for a lot of us. So when he spoke about those very magical words, it was like literally planting a seed for hope for us in Mexico and Latin America, that we finally were going to be able to be not Americans, but we were going to be able to participate in the growth, and we were going to be accepted. that's really what we remember the most, what I remember the most out of that particular event. And I remember trying to phone what was the Philco at that time, black and white, television. It was a gathering, and that was a very important event, even from people south of the border. The event that day was important for all of us, and I remember it clearly. So.
As a young boy at 9 years old, I distinctly remember that in my family, as I remember, we were the first black family that had a TV in the neighborhood. So everybody came to our house to look at TV, and we made it almost a family thing that day. I don't remember very much about the day itself, but I do remember that we were all in the living room looking at his inauguration, and distinctly I remember probably one of the only quotes I can remember at that time was I'm getting a little shaky about the exact words, but what you can do for your country instead of what your country can do for you. And what that meant to me was I had to make a bold statement of whatever discrimination I was going through, because if I wanted change, I would have to do that myself. To sit back and let hopefully the country would do for me, that would not happen, because it had not happened for the last 200 years as a black person. And as a family, I just remember after that speech that everybody stood up and just clapped in the living room for quite a long time, hugged and kissed each other, and how happy my family was and the neighborhood. So we had hope. And I think from that day forward, we all knew we had to do something for ourselves if we were going to make a change for a better world.
Do you think that undoubtedly, even at 9 years old, planted some seeds that helped you draw strength when you became a gay activist yourself?
I think when I reacted, I think when I moved here in '88, I went through some discrimination about bars and 3-card thing, and I got so upset. And as I look back now, that probably was a seed that if I wanted to change that attitude, I would have to get involved with the community to make that change. And hopefully that helped a little bit. I'm not going to say I was the person that did it, but I think by me speaking up about it, and hopefully some other people felt that, well, we don't need to go to that place if that's what happens to friends of mine.
Right.
So hopefully that seed was implanted back then.
And speaking of planting seeds, I want to carry just a little bit further with Monica, that you spoke in your response of the message of inclusion that you heard, being, a citizen of Mexico, and that JFK articulated, perhaps the first time for American presidents, such an aura of inclusion of our neighbors to the south. Do you feel like that feeling of inclusion perhaps was an inspiration for you as you started on your journey, of your own journey into the GLBT community?
An opportunity to reflect on the fact that eventually I was going to be living here in the United States. There seemed to be changes happening here, as radical as they were, as depressed as a certain part of our community were, as so much racism existed then. There was that opportunity. And I came from a family that read a lot. I started reading the paper when I was 4 or 5 years old. We all waited for my father to finish his paper and just like dogs jump into it, you know, and read it. And we were very keen to that. And so politics and newspapers and stories from the United States were that. My family came from the United States as it was. So I believe that in this life, we choose not only people, sometimes we choose timelines or symbolisms, but in this case, we chose one president to be symbolic for change. We gave him that responsibility. So I think I arrived to the United States with dreams under my arms, knowing that the opportunities created in the 60s were going to allow me to be who I am today.
Thank you so much for that insight. My own favorite passage from, and it's always been, even when I was a 13-year-old girl, was this, and it reads, "All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor it will be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the lifetime of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet, but let us begin." And that phrase jumped out to me. And I think that what it said to me was, it's a long journey, but there's someone leading the country who is reaching out to all of us and saying we must all try, whether it's going to take all our lives or beyond, that it's a long, long journey. And I know as I became influenced by Kennedy and became acutely aware of racial injustice, and this was very easy living in a small town in southern Oklahoma in the 60s, that I think it instilled in me a resolve to be a part of the change process as a teenager, and then as I went on to college and I went to graduate school where I realized that I was a lesbian, met my partner there, and have been part of the LGBT rights movement. But I think that this whole concept that we are on a long journey is something that particularly struck me, and I think it's emblematic of really, if you look at the history of the GLBT community in Dallas, I think that what you see, and when you watch Finding Our Voice, what you see is a willingness to work within the system, but also a resolve to push the envelope. And those are both very important approaches. And I think that that can be linked directly back to John F. Kennedy and his legacy. So I think, interestingly enough, and I hope you're starting to think about this as you hear us, that some of the approaches of the GLBT movement in Dallas can really be rooted in those of us who were early activists and got our inspiration from JFK. I'm going to move to my next question, and that is, what lessons learned in America from JFK's legacy do you believe can influence the future of the movement for GLBT equality? So let's take a look at the legacy and what you perhaps see of the future in the movement, and what can you gain from his legacy and perhaps what you see in the future. Monica, do you want to start, and then Ron?
I use the word that he's a symbol. What happened in the 60s, it really was a Pandora box. And it was not only an ability of gay men and lesbians to realize, to have an opportunity to express oneself, but also women, you know. the women's movement, and all of those things. So there were a lot of things. Certainly the civil rights that happened in this country gave us an opportunity to look beyond ourselves. And let's face it, we were never going to go back. His assassination was an offense to many, many people. He represented so many things. If he was hope, it was like somebody was trying to take away that hope away from us. So other people took the torch. Other people came forward. And just like Ron said before, he asked himself, what can he do for this country? So we ourselves had to make a decision. There wasn't going to be a John F. Kennedy. And he himself came in a very conservative background. And that's why, as much as I recognize his input, and as much as he influenced me and other people, again, he is the timeline in my mind. Looking into Dallas, when I came to Dallas, arrived to a city that, how do you know what to expect? This is the city where Kennedy was killed. And accommodations were made through the 60s with minorities. There was no riots here in this country, I mean in this part of this world. They were in Detroit, they were in LA, they were in New York. They were able to solve the differences with a little more blood, with a little more strength. But they were over sooner than later. We still have problems. What Kennedy also taught us was that we still have a lot of work to do. And we're still working on those problems. But when I came to Dallas, you were talking, you opened a door for me to jump into it in the sense that there's a lot of guilt in this country, in this city. There was a lot of guilt in 1973 when I finally arrived here. And that question was always there when I went back to Mexico. You went to Dallas? That's the city that killed Kennedy. And we have had to deal with that. And I think just to make it short for for the question that you said, I think Kennedy was the symbolism for us to be able to go forward. He wasn't going to be able to solve all of the problems. It was up to us. And he gave us the opportunity to express ourselves.
Very good. Ron, what do you think perhaps a lesson learned from in America from JFK's legacy can be applied to where you think the GLBT rights movement ought to be going?
I think with Kennedy, I think he wanted to include everyone. When he said minority group, my feelings is that he not only wanted African Americans to get equal opportunity, but for everyone, women.
Yes.
It may not have been as strong as it is now, but my thinking and my feeling was hopefully would have included gay and lesbian folks. And I think the best thing that we can do, as he asked, is to step out and make a change. And for the future, I think we really, that's the best thing to do, is to step forward, bring it to attention, and say, look, this has to change. This is discrimination. I've always, and I look at this whole struggle from a black perspective. I have to look at that from that view because of who I am naturally. But that's where at 9, that was the one thing that was more prominent to me. And when people say that everybody's different, that their discrimination is different from anybody else, from the viewpoint of seeing, you can see I'm black, we don't necessarily can see who's gay and who's not. But when you discriminate, it is discrimination, and he stepped forward and said it has to end. So we have to be very outspoken about it, no matter what farming comes in.
Right.
So hopefully people that are younger than we are will step out and speak against any kind of discrimination.
I think both of your answers have brought some, what I heard was two very powerful themes. And one was on inclusion and the other was on the urgency of change and never giving up. Going back to, again, the inaugural address that I talked about, it will not be finished perhaps even in our lifetime on the planet, but we have to keep change. In other words, keep our eyes on the prize, to borrow an old phrase from the civil rights movement, that change needs to be continuous, and we need to reach out to our allies within the non-GLBT community, particularly our allies, as you mentioned, Ron, those who share oppression, not necessarily in the same way, but those who understand the sting of oppression. And Monica, in your theme about talking about inclusion, what I believe is something that's very urgent for the GLBT movement is the inclusion of the transgender community. And this is one of the future trends that I see that I think is very, very important, is the inclusion of the transgender community, that we truly must become a GLBT community, that is gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender. And I think that you can see that happening, and I think it's something that absolutely must continue. It's something that I personally am committed to, and Monica, do you have some thoughts about that as a trans woman? But we have to keep change. In other words, keep our eyes on the prize, to borrow an old phrase from the civil rights movement, that change needs to be continuous, and we need to reach out to our allies within the non-GLBT community, particularly our allies, as you mentioned, Ron, those who share oppression, not necessarily in the same way, but those who understand the sting of oppression. And Monica, in your theme about talking about inclusion, what I believe is something that's very urgent for the GLBT movement is the inclusion of the transgender community. And this is one of the future trends that I see that I think is very, very important, is the inclusion of the transgender community, that we truly must become a GLBT community, that is gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender. And I think that you can see that happening, and I think it's something that absolutely must continue. It's something that I personally am committed to, and Monica, do you have some thoughts about that as a trans woman?
I think I just want to echo what Ron said. I believe that if we would have had an opportunity to have had this president and then his brother,
yes.
It would have been a good opportunity for us to have gotten further sooner. I'm sure that Nixon did not help us, and we could agree or disagree with that, but certainly we had an opportunity to be able to overcome some things on time. In regard to the transsexual community, you have to understand, for those that don't know, I don't want to be redundant, that the very first operation for transgenders occurred in Denmark in 1952. Although it was very well publicized, by 1959, there had not been another person. There had been a transgender at least publicized. By 1964, the first hospital in America, at the same time of the civil rights, that dedicated itself to transgender issues, was open. Dr. Benjamin also started his practice then. So this particular certainly don't want to call it anything or what it is, but this transgender issue is in its infancy. There is really not a lot of data, but 40 years of how people react to it, how that affects, how hormones really affect men that are trying to feminize their body or women that are trying to masculize it. So this is a very important issue for the future of the gay and lesbian community, bisexual, because we certainly appreciate that. And I only have one voice. I don't pretend to represent the transgender community. It's a diverse community itself, but I think that it's utterly important that as we struggle in the 60s to acquire our own identities and be accepted, despite the color of your skin, or whether you were gay or lesbian, or whether you were a woman trying to earn the same amount of money, that the voice that we heard singing in the 1950s, with women hiding in the back of doctors' hospitals to get an abortion, where we could not sit in the same part of the bus, or sit in a cafeteria, that the same type of freedoms that we acquired during those times in the 60s and 70s, because an example of a young president that fought so hard for civil rights, that we today open the door for not discriminating transgender people. We don't have the numbers. We don't know how many of us there are, but they are among you. We were taught to hide ourselves, not to tell anyone, and some of us have chosen just to be ourselves, to open our businesses to doors under our same names, and not to be able to hide anymore. And we do it sometimes in a very conservative environment, such as Dallas. And I like it. I always compare Dallas to be like a rough ocean. They tell me, how do you manage to live in such a conservative environment? And I tell them, it's like swimming in an ocean. You tread water, sometimes it's very hard to keep afloat. But just like an ocean, if you just hold your breath just long enough and go about this much underwater, it's so peaceful. And I'm grateful that I'm here, and I'm grateful that we had a young president that his life was cut short, and that he brought about civil rights changes for all of us.
And I think that, and I thank you so much for that, the personal recollection. And I think that even one thing Ron said, and you may want to expand on this, is that certainly I recall in the late 70s and early 80s that our community was, I think, not as dedicated to ridding itself of racism. And so that's another urgency in uniting the community, not only bringing the bisexual, the B and the T into the G and L community, but also ridding itself of racism, which is really, I think, one of the things at the heart of the Kennedy legacy. Do you have any further comment on that?
Well, I think the gay community itself is a copy of society itself.
Yes.
And we live in and learn from exploring other people. And I think Kennedy, not only Kennedy, but Miss Rosa Parks did, Kennedy, Dr. King, and a lot of other folks stepped forward, took a step. And we have to learn from them that if we want change, we have to stand up, step forward, and say, this is enough. We have to change it. And it's not to change just for me, but for everyone else. Because I think if you think about it now, if it wasn't for those folks, we would not be sitting here as we are right today. Right. We would not. We would have white people sitting here. We probably wouldn't have any black or Hispanic people in here at all. But think about it. We have all nationalities. We are welcome anywhere, almost. But in this country. So we learn from our ancestors that we have to be bold, be very brave, and take that chance. We have to step out and be a little different from the norm, whatever that may be.
And I do think that I totally agree with you, Ron, and feel like that the Dallas GLBT community has really an enormous legacy of being able to work together, men and women, and being able to move through racial problems, and now with I think some great opportunities to pull in the bisexual and transgender community, that I think that we'll continue our own legacy of inclusion, which kind of goes back now to the beginning theme, and that is JFK and why we're here tonight. And I'd like to wrap up before we go to Q&A by a couple of quotes from the 50th anniversary edition of Profiles in Courage. This is John F. Kennedy's Pulitzer Prize winning book that he wrote in the mid-50s when he was convalescing from his a back injury operation that he sustained in World War II. And what's great about the 50th anniversary edition, by the way, and I'm putting in kind of a plug for it, is that it has an introduction by his daughter, Carolyn Kennedy, and the foreword by his brother, Robert Kennedy. And then in the back, it talks about some of the remarkable people who have received the John F. Kennedy Profile in Courage Award that is given by the foundation. So I really would urge you to pick it up, because Kennedy's theme in this book is to describe famous senators, U.S. senators who risk it all, who put their careers on the line because of what they thought was right. And in the foreword, I'm going to leave you with a statement from Robert Kennedy, who said, if there's a lesson in the lives of those that Kennedy depicts in this book, and if there's a lesson from his life, JFK's life, and from his death, it is that in this world of ours, none of us can afford to be onlookers, the critics standing on the sidelines. And he further says, Kennedy was very fond of quoting Dante, who said that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in a time of great moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. So that's a charge not only for us in the GLBT community, but for those of you who are attending who are outside the community and who are allies and want to join us in our quest for what Kennedy sought, which was an America of equality. So with that, I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience, if you don't mind. If you would stand up, state your name, speak in a very loud voice, and direct your question to any of the panelists. Yes?
My name is Anthony Marshall. I guess my question is, I'm luckily not a child of the Kennedy era. I was born after the assassination, so I'm a little bit younger than some of you. Excuse me. My question is, it seems like we've gone through a period in which the movement was very serious. Mm-hmm. And we had movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and they've remade those movies and they've made comedies out of them. Mm-hmm. And it seems like the movement is becoming a comedy. It's no longer serious. And I guess I want to know, what is the step to get it back to being serious?
And that is the GLBT movement.
Yes.
Okay. Do either one of y'all want to take a shot at that?
I think we're serious. Personally, I tend to disagree. I think there's so much flexibility right now and so much diversity within my own transgender community, there are so many people that think differently that it's difficult to get a consensus. And why not? Why not accept the fact that we're so different in that sense? I think the past, I've been in Dallas for 34 years, and I think in the past 5-6 years, there has been more opportunity for the GLBT community to advance, to promote themselves, to be able to participate, to be accepted, to affect change in many instances. I think there is, if I just jump in your comment, I think we are a reflection of the community, and there's so many things affecting us that sometimes we haven't learned our lessons, and we're learning our lessons. We have a disease that has ravaged the gay and lesbian community that we still having to deal with. As dangerous as it is, we tend to get lax about it at times. And that's because we have new medicine available. So we have to be able to understand that where we are today is a good thing, but there's a lot of work to be done. And we have to be able not to forget the lessons that we learned. Fortunately, you're too young for this. In the 60s, for us to be able to be here. I mean, we talk about Camelot, and we have examples of every president since I've been in this country and before that, since Kennedy, that they all measure with his stick, you know, of what he does. And Jacqueline Kennedy, the same thing. This was a very icon that affected not only America and the changes in the gay and lesbian community and women and civil rights, but around the world. I am a Berliner, he said one day. And God, everybody understands what that means.
Mm-hmm. Yes, excellent point. Ron?
Well, I think we get lax, like she said, on our struggle. I think in the 50s or 60s and back before that, it was very difficult for a person of color to do anything at that time. And it has improved. I think the gay and lesbian community saw a chance that, or they saw a pattern that if we want equal opportunity, we have to step out just like the African American community. And I think the African American community saw that as a threat. And I look at it not as a threat, but more people to work with, and no people that you have to work with, but much more power. Vote that you have, that you can change things. And right now that it's almost kind of too easy that when someone steps out and says that I'm being discriminated against, we look at it and say, okay, we just need to change it, but we don't step out and protest, and we kind of work under their radar. But I think we can't just sit back and let these things just happen very lightly, because before we know it, it will come back and bite us. Because I don't know, I think it was Dr. King again that said that if we allow one person to be discriminated against, when will that come back to me? And what voice do I have, of power do I have when I allow that person to be discriminated against? So we have to stand up when we see just one person being discriminated against. And I don't know, we just have become too relaxed and it has become too easy for us to live our lives, I guess. And some of us say, well, if it's not bothering me, I'm okay. And that's not the way it should be.
And I think we need to look for opportunities, like, for example, the enormous change we're seeing today in corporate America and all the inclusive workplace policies. I think that's kind of a new wave of opportunity. And actually, I believe there's a lot of serious stuff that's going on in corporate America toward the GLBT movement. And I see a hand up here, and then one here, and then on the front row. So, yes, and I think we have a mic over here up front. If you would, state your name, please.
Sure, my name is Chris. I thought it was a very interesting panel you guys have. It's certainly representative of a great amount of diversity. It's very interesting. You've done a nice job putting it together. I have two comments and a question for you, Monica. Dallas is a very interesting place. My family moved here from Philadelphia, and it really exists. There's no reason for Dallas to exist. There's no waterways. There's no... it exists for one reason, that's commerce and banking. And no one really talks about politics in this city that I've seen openly. You don't go to dinners where people are having lively conversations about politics because, God forbid, you should piss somebody off with your politics because then they'll hurt you monetarily. So I think that's a real bad thing for this city in general. The other is that you made a comment about corporate America opening up to gay people, black people, Hispanic people. I don't think corporate America loves minorities or people on the fringes. Justice depends on those in power, their consideration, and I think people consider money. And if gay and lesbian people present more of a front with money and power, then you'll get listened to. But I don't think people are showing this.
You had a question for Monica?
I'm sorry, Monica. My question personally is to you. You deal with in a very the restaurant business is very machismo oriented. Hispanic culture is not always real pleasant to effeminate males or to gay and lesbians, and I'm curious, how do you deal with on a daily basis, not only being in this city where it's extremely conservative and not terribly nice to people in the outside, but with the machismo and being who you are and getting respect and treated with equality?
I have had a wonderful life, and don't run and get a change. It's not that interesting. A reincarnation in the same lifetime teaches you a lot of lessons. It gives you a new color to look at life. I don't want to sound Pollyannish. I'm sure there are people that choose not to participate in my restaurant, not to like me for whatever reason, not to understand me, accept me, not to talk to me. But those people have chosen to remain silent. I live in a fantasy world. I live in a very good world. I love Dallas. I'm enamored with its people, the opportunities it gives me, the opportunities I have created for myself. The city itself embraces me for most of the time. I'm a challenge for a lot of people. I challenge their integrity. I challenge their ability to reason, challenge their humanity, their sexuality at times. It is an incredible opportunity for me to understand what that means. My restaurant is benign to all kinds of people, everyone. We don't discriminate. And the people that walk through my door tend to understand who I am. I ran for city council about a year and a half ago. What a great civic lesson. You must do that. And it gives you a new perspective. I used to say, if you want to find out who your friends are, change your sex. I now say, if you want to know who your friends are, change your sex and run for politics. You say that it's a very conservative environment, and it is. There's a lot of realities in this world and in this city. We suffer discrimination every day. Whether you're a transsexual, whether you're black, whether you're Jew, whether you're fat, you're skinny, you're a short man, tall women, it doesn't matter. You're discriminated against in some arena. I don't focus on that. During my campaign, I learned that this conservative environment community supported me the most. They were my friends. The newspaper, some of the people that do business in this community that knew my political affiliations, Democrat, liberal, transsexual, put that aside to be able to support an economic idea, an idea of inclusion. And the Democratic Party at times supported me, and at times it didn't. It was a little less impressed with that. But they have a choice, and so is the Republicans and so on that. I am a Democrat, and I have to tell you that I have learned a big lesson. You should vote for the person. We should elect officials that can do the job. And we should not discriminate anyone.
Thank you very much. And I see our time's kind of expiring, but what I would like to do, I'd like to go for the next 2 questions, and we'll do a hard stop at 5 minutes after 8. So, and that'll work out fine. I think we'll be able to get these 2 questions in. Next question, please. If you would state your name.
Yeah, Keith Bernardo. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm a transplant to Dallas from New York about a year now, and
Wonderful.
It seems like you're the only 2 restaurants I go to. So I got to open up my scope here a little bit. It seemed like the discussion tonight, hinged on an ideology, born of Kennedy, right? Yes. So, and Dr. Young sort of surmised it down to like 2 ideas: inclusion and sort of social agency or social responsibility. Mm-hmm. So you may see where I'm going with this. The current leadership that our country falls prey to, what I was going to say, but falls under, seems not to, or I should just neutralize it and say, has different ideologies. And one of them that I personally feel is not the idea of inclusion, but exclusion in terms of, most potently, same-sex marriage. So since the discussion hinged on Kennedy's sort of birthing of ideas and movements and zeitgeists, what if effect has the Bush administration had on such social thinking?
Okay, Ron, do you want to take that one?
I would be happy to. I think his actions and ideas has forced us to rethink our strategy. I don't think we're backing down. We may push a little bit harder, not as hard as we would like, but and I don't want to say agenda because I hate that word because it's not an agenda. It's just the way we all would like to be treated. Agenda sounds there's too much baggage with that, and people turn it around and make it one-sided. And as everyone knows, probably in this room, that everybody, gay, straight, black, white, brown, yellow, everybody would like to be treated equal, and no one wants to be get no more than the pie than anyone else. And this administration has got us at a stance where we're almost after each other instead of coming together. We're winding up being against each other, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. Gay marriage? Well, my marriage to a man wouldn't harm your marriage to a woman. How can that doesn't make any sense to me. Unless you're going to change your sexuality and change it to mine, because I'm not going to change it after some 50 years. I'm still gay. I've been that way for a long time. So,
Okay.
For every action, there's a reaction. And the advances that we've done in the past 40 years create that reaction. We have a president today that was elected by a minimum margin. Some of us think it was stolen, but anyway. But I do believe that's part of the reaction. September 11 didn't help, and religion has become a big part of it. I don't want to talk about religion, but I do want to talk about the fact that a lot of these issues, I believe personally that we're about half a generation away, if not a generation away, to be able to resolve most of the gay issues in America. I think that most of us, including those conservative individuals there in the White House, know someone, love someone, have someone in their family who happens to be gay or lesbian. And this transition is hard for them. It is important for us to maintain our course and for us to be able to be eloquent and to be able to understand our mission, which is not to transform this community and gay, lesbian community, but the mission of having to express ourselves for who we are and accept others because of that. So I believe that, to make it short, this is our reaction and it's that pendulum, and I think it's coming back. We just need to be patient.
Question in the front, and then that'll probably be the last questions. We'll do a wrap up.
Vivian Armstrong, your longtime partner. What do y'all think that Kennedy, if he were to come out on stage here today, would say to us, having listened to this? I mean, do you think he would validate what you said? Do you think he'd be comfortable talking about gay marriage? Do you think that he would feel that his hope was, in fact, realized?
Well,
this would be a start. I don't think he would say this. He would probably say we're headed to that direction. A good struggle, a worthwhile struggle, always takes a long time. I think in his words were not exactly those, but it would not come in his lifetime. So I think we're headed towards that direction of his idea of a perfect world, whatever that may be.
and you know what I think on this is that we have to look to an example, and to me, that example is his brother, Ted Kennedy, Senator Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts, who I think all of us realize carries the Kennedy legacy. And when we see what Ted Kennedy has done in support of our community, really for certainly the last 25 years, is just remarkable. And therefore, I am confident that JFK would be right along in there adding his voice and being able to make the link between what he said to inspire us then and supporting us now, just as his brother who carries the mantle does.
It's funny you said that because I was looking at the picture earlier and I was thinking, he would have been 84, 86 years old. He would have been arriving probably with a cane, very frail, and funny. A man who probably had recognized his failures as a man personal with his family. A man who had achieved too much for us to be able to talk about it today. But a man that probably was very, very advanced for his time. When we talk about leaders in this country and other countries, those that are reflected as leaders are because they're a little ahead of their time. You have to remember that in the 60s and 70s, if you were a gay man or a gay lesbian, you were probably not aware of it. If you were aware of it, you were married, you were hiding it, wearing your pearls, and talking about your husband. So the reality is that we don't know how many men in power went to the same conundrum or not, or knew people that went through the same conundrum. I am confident, almost with certainty, that this president would have been a very sympathetic man to the cause that we're talking about today.
And as I make some final remarks, I'll ask our sponsor to come up, and because I know you have a couple of closing remarks, but if you want to just kind of come up and stand by us. I'd like to close with some, I think, extremely pertinent statements from Kennedy's inaugural address. He says, I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generations. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so we were privileged tonight to share some of our thoughts from the GLBT community on the legacy of John F. Kennedy, and it's the legacy that is so richly preserved in the exhibits and the archives of the Sixth Floor Museum. And if any of you folks have not had a chance to tour the museum, it is an extremely enriching experience. I think that those of us on the panel are enriched from having participated, and I certainly hope those of you in the audience are. And I think the exhortation of Kennedy to go and be a change agent for good in the world rings as true then as it does now, perhaps even more so. And therefore then I think that it's up to us to take the seeds of Kennedy's remarkable charisma and dedication to change and move out then from this point forward to do what we can to change the world for the better.